Thank you for having. Thank you for the patience. I think I will start with giving a thanks to all the archivists and all the curators that I've been seeing since yesterday, because all this great work that has been done or that is being done for digitizing archives, researchers such as myself base my PhD thesis on. And to continue what Ona mentioned about how archives are used for general civic sense, but I will be presenting the case of how the archives can be used for planning and decision making. To introduce my presentation, I will be presenting a short excerpt of my ongoing PhD thesis with Bezalel Academy. The title of my presentation is Datascaping as an operative tool, and I'll be presenting an empirical review for how use of datascaping can be addressing issues of sustainable planning for historic urban landscapes. And this doctoral thesis is part of the Headland project, which is an IT and innovative training network of the European Horizon 2020. And I am an early stage researcher at Bezalel with my supervisors, Professor Els and Professor Michael Turner and Professor Frank from TU Delft. So to elaborate what my thesis is based on, it's the main component is culture as an enabler for sustainable development. And I quote here Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate, who mentions that cultural matters are an integral part of our lives. And if development can be seen as enhancement of our living standards, then efforts geared to development can hardly ignore the world of culture. The complex relationship between culture and sustainability has radically affected our understanding and practices of urban planning. And the concept of sustainability, which emerged in late 1960s, gradually developed into a complex structure of values, ideas, relations, and practical application modes. And initially, it was a triad of three aspects: economic, social, and environmental sustainability. And later, the culture emerged to become the fourth pillar of this philosophy. The diagrams here, which is extracted from Dessen et al., it shows that how the relationship of these of the four pillars define the roles of sustainability, and culture can be an enabler in sustainable development or for sustainable development, and as encompassing the overall sustainable development of the three main pillars. And they are not mutually exclusive, but rather represent different ways of thinking and organizing values, meanings, and norms strategically and eclectically in relation to the discussions on sustainable development. And culture can be a main contributing factor towards this achieving the goal of sustainability. To explain the concept of historic urban landscape, which is a part of the cultural sustainability and cultural landscapes, the whole conservation philosophy started with the Venice Charter of 1964, and later on the 1972 World Heritage Convention, which explains the 10 criteria of World Heritage, and which links the contemporary architecture, sustainable urban development, and integrity of cultural landscapes. I quote here the Vienna Memorandum, which emphasizes on identification of historic urban landscapes as and the need to preserve it in a sensitive manner while strengthening identity and social cohesion. So this research, which I'll be presenting, it delves in areas of historic urban landscapes, modern development, sensitive practices, and social cohesion. And the idea that heritage emerged as a result of historical reconfigurations in cultural, social, and practical relations with time is well established in theory. However, this phenomenon of modernization in historic cities, which produces otherness, has not been included, or it doesn't have cognizance in the planning and decision-making practices. And it is often underrepresented in these frameworks. So to elaborate this process, I take help of two major guidelines, which is the Historic Urban Landscape Recommendations of UNESCO, which was established in 2011, and the New Urban Agenda of the UN Habitat, which was established in 2017. And these emphasize on attributes beyond the protected areas or beyond the cultural ensemble, which has been identified by UNESCO as World Heritage. And this emphasizes on different attributes or the attributes of the wider context, which notably is the site's topography, geomorphology, the geography, hydrology, and so on, and as well as the spirit and the spirit and feeling, or the social and cultural practices or values, which was mentioned in one of the previous presentations. And the New Urban Agenda, which emphasizes on sustainable planning and development, it also emphasizes and mentions the role of preserving cultural heritage and how it can be beneficial for upgrading the urban standards or urban standards of living, as well as urban development. So these two guidelines, they have laid down the toolkits for so they've laid down the toolkits for use and for decision-making practices. However, the knowledge tools or planning tools need to be elaborated. And I explain it in the ways of how impact assessments or the need for sustainability impact assessment plays an important role in execution or the use of these guidelines. On here on the slide, I mentioned the schematic diagram of central communication systems by Shannon. And if we see this diagram, it shows that how the external noise in the process of transmitting a message from one to the other end, the external noise can actually change distract the whole received signal. And this is where I mentioned that the impact assessment methodologies can be used as a tool to help achieve sustainable development and to protect, to conserve, and to inculcate or to incorporate these values of the historic urban landscapes in the process of decision-making and planning. So I base my research on three main pillars of datascaping, that is the how or the method, because mapping is a subjective method driven by concepts, scales, patterns, and perspectives of historic urban landscapes, which is the areas which we recognize beyond the protected, and cognizance of historical spatial configurations is diachronicity and attributes of value need to be incorporated or addressed and acknowledged. And the reason is to attain sustainable impact assessments or sustainable development by documenting the different forms or datascapes which have a potential to break the first dichotomy of analysis and design by constructing different visualizations that can help or assess aid the processes of assessments and planning. So datascaping, by the use of geographic information systems, digitizing archival records, and innovative tools such as image recognition or crowdsourcing and analysis. And the attributes of historic urban landscapes are incorporated within these datascaping processes. And the paradigm shift of based on science of cities and thinking beyond the box is for achieving sustainability and linking good urbanization practices, spatial planning, and understanding the quality of life, or how the elements of social, economic, and environmental changes impact these areas spatially. So the array of elements that make up a city and the relations between them, they give the city identity and characteristics, but remain difficult to describe, map, and analyze coherently. And this problem is intensified in contemporary cities. Here I quote Michael Prost, and he says that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And this is where I bring in this concept of datascaping and the question of how to bridge the data which is available and represented visually. I present the case of Jaffa, which is an ancient port town, which is now on a part of the Tel Aviv Yafo municipality. Tel Aviv became World Heritage in 2003. However, it is also mentioned by many researchers and scholars that the story of Tel Aviv is incomplete without acknowledging the story of Jaffa and the attributes of or the foundation of Jaffa as the historic ancient port. Now, which is a marginalized reality and a derelict Arab port, the social spatial configurations of Jaffa town are observed to have been interwoven with its landscape, uses, and specifically to architecture, agriculture, and industrial and residential. So the grandiose of this port town, owing to its economic vitality, was demonstrated by palatial houses of Oriental architecture, which now it has been reduced due to the overpowering World Heritage story. The modern city of Tel Aviv, as I mentioned, it was inscribed as World Heritage, and the transformations, the socio-spatial transformations of Tel Aviv made it into an urban partition zone with physical and cognitive boundaries, which impacted the urban planning and heritage management processes. So this historic urban landscape of Jaffa is the urban area which can be understood as a result of historic layering of cultural and natural values, its attributes which extend beyond the boundary or the buffer zone of the historic ensemble. And this research attempts to inculcate the SDGs into a framework for achieving sustainability of this historic urban landscape by exploring methods of digital datascaping as an operative tool. I based my research on understanding what policies or guidelines have been laid for this area in the municipality, and it mentions that developing tools to reinforce the trust between Yafo's residents or to encourage residents to lead a sustainable lifestyle are the provisions or the policies included in the strategic planning. However, upon more examination or more assessments, I realized that though there are these policies or steps taken towards achieving sustainability, there is a lack of a tool which integrates all different information or data that can be utilized for planning and decision making. So this nuanced information is important, and that can be achieved by representation through GIS or georeferencing by digital means, by using pluralist data sets, multi-layered datascaping, and the historic complexity of the historicity codes from the use of archival information, such as maps, literature, and images, and digitally analyzing this information. So I explain one or two explorations that I have been conducting through use of archival material. This is a map of from 1719 of the historic port of Jaffa, and by georeferencing this, by digitizing this this historic map and using the attributes of historic urban landscapes, one can find many information through layering and understanding that how the city was built through different attributes, such as the well houses, the albassa, which is the swamp area, the orange orchards, the agricultural fields, and understanding it in the current context, if these layers or attributes have any bearing or any semblance in the current configurations. And by studying the present day modalities of this particular area, which is now the Bloomberg Stadium, which was flooded in 2020. And this also gives us an information of how the geography of this particular land was initially incorporated in the planning, and however these attributes are not considered or not given the priority for in policy or planning of the spatial configurations. Another example which I show here is the use of archival material for mapping and comparing it with the current tourism potential or the tourism districts, which has been portrayed by the Tel Aviv municipality. This is basically to understand that how the partition zone has been perpetuated and is being perpetuated through the current maps that are being processed. This one of the maps was also mentioned in a presentation yesterday, and this particular exercise tells us that how by use of archival material and mapping the historic extent of the physical as well as the intangible heritage, but which may not be existing at the moment, and overlaying it with the current map of the physical of the tourist Jaffa, which is in blue, if you can see my cursor. So the blue is the Tel Aviv tourism map of Ajami, whereas the green shows the information extracted from the 1940 Palestine map. And if by understanding how different communities or organizations want to portray the memory or the intangible heritage of this place, which is beyond the tourist zone or the zone which is propagated as the tourist area. So this example also shows that how layering has the capacity to give this information which is not acknowledged in planning processes. Another example is by use of archival photographs and comparing it with the current 3D or 3D or OpenStreetMaps from Google, and trying to understand that how the spatial configurations have evolved and the drastic changes in land use patterns have evolved, as well as how does it have a bearing or any acknowledgement in the current planning or policy documents. So I'll show an example of how the attributes can be mapped and how it can be measured. This work is in progress. So yeah. Another example that I came across was the archival map from 1930s, and upon overlaying it with the current GIS layer, which shows the community gardens. So this piqued my interest of what the community gardens are, and upon overlaying, it was understood that these were the orange orchards, which have now been built upon. Some of them are protected as open areas and green spaces, but there's a connection with how these community spaces or the previous use of orange orchards does not have a bearing on the current land use planning. So I raise questions of why and how these areas are being treated, and if this kind of information has been utilized for arriving at such decisions. Another example of the gentrification that has been going around in Jaffa and its bearing on the high real estate prices that we see in this area, also because of the proximity to the sea, and as well as it has become the cultural tourist spot, and which has a bearing on the real estate prices. So I map different layers of the listed heritage buildings, the amount of building permits that have been submitted to the Tel Aviv municipality, that we see that a huge number of building permits are submitted owing to the changes in the areas, owing to new Airbnbs or services catering to the tourist fraternity. And the kind of tourist footfall that we have in these areas is only very much focused on the old tourist Jaffa or the old port of Jaffa, and its bearing, which is this heat map, which shows that how the tourist footfall or the changes also lead to a high real estate prices in this particular area, and this leading to gentrification or marginalization of the old or the original inhabitants, and currently how it has a bearing on the socioeconomic aspects. So this is where I try to reflect how different information can be utilized for understanding the current situations and the gap in sustainable planning. So to conclude, my whole research in few lines is that we have seen that throughout recorded history, cities have been studied and planned and imagined as places for their form and structures, and they can be represented in models, maps, and pictures of locations. And documenting these landscapes as an anecdote, special memory, identity, and transition has potential for reconnaissance of values and attributes and drivers of change. And this geospatial analysis of historic urban landscapes has the potential to reconstruct the palimpsest of information of their special configurations. And this exercise is basically to enhance the understanding of challenges to urban design and planning for social inclusion and sustainable economic growth. And future initiatives could thereby be motivated by such interpretive datascaping. And this method can be applied across decision-making, across different fraternities, and as Ona mentioned about interdisciplinary aspects of decision-making and planning. Thank you.